My name is Wangoi Kanyaru. I was here earlier in the clinic, and I helped moderate one of the first sessions on context setting. And it is my joy to also help moderate this debate. This is going to be an Oxford-style debate, meaning that there's going to be a discussion or an interaction on the stage between the people who are the proponents of the motion, the people who are against the motion, with them first starting off with their position statements, their opening statements, followed by an opportunity for them to respond to each other's opening statements. And then we'll have a panel of judges that will interact with them, ask questions, make observations, and then you yourselves will be participating also as part of this conversation. And at the very end, you yourselves will in fact be the ones that determine who wins this debate, who presents the most compelling arguments for this debate. We have an august panel of judges sitting up front, and I'll introduce them very shortly. I'll ask them to stand up and sort of wave once they're introduced. And we will also have you at the beginning sort of help us take the temperature of the room with regard to the proposed motion that is at hand. So, starting with Olefunsho Shimurin, if you could stand up. Wave. Olefunsho is with Africa Development Bank. We also have Dr. Rebecca Shirley, who's with WRI. We have Nyagodhie Chege, who's with the Green Belt Movement. And Jack Kimani, who is with CAP-A. So these are your august judges. We have a motion before us. And the motion is the following. Carbon markets represent a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya. Carbon markets represent a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya. Now, it is time to take the pulse of the room. How many of you are for that motion? If you're for it, make some noise. Thank you. How many of you are against the motion that carbon markets present a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya? Loud and proud, guys, loud and proud. Let's hear you. Wow, okay, let's have just a little bit more conviction. And it's okay to disagree. That's the whole point of a debate here. So how many of you are against this motion that carbon markets present a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya? Let's hear you, make some noise. Okay then. How many of you just don't know? It really could go either way for you. Anyone? All right, I see a few hands, very good. I suspect that's the same for our judges. It really could go either way. The question is, are we persuaded by the arguments put forth? Now, I'd like to introduce the people who are for this motion, and I will ask them, as their names are read, to, demonstrate some hype, some energy, some commitment. So first we have Murefu Barasa of EED Advisory. That is Murefu demonstrating commitment and excitement. We have Charles Wawero, Versed Carbon. And Aaron Leopold of Energrow. On the side that is against this motion, we have Cecilia Wandiga from the Center for Science and Technology Innovations. We have Desmond Tutu Owoth of ACNBS Advisory. And last but not least, we have Irene Asuma from Ecological Justice. I think Irene deserves a special hand because she put up her hand to speak into this situation at the very last moment. So a big hand for Irene. So, this is the format of the debate. For the debaters, your timekeeper is Wanjora Mathai. So once she raises her hand, you know that it is time to lower your voice. You're going to start off with opening statements, 3 minutes each. And those that are for I think you're going to speak in alternate sort of order. So the individuals that are for, we'll have Charles start us off, and then Cecilia will speak against. We'll have, we'll have Charles start us off, Cecilia will speak against. We'll have Murefu go next, and Desmond Tutu will speak after him. We will have Aaron go third, and we'll have Irene follow. You each have 3 minutes to make your opening statement. After you've made your opening statements, each of you will have 2 minutes to respond to anything the other side has said. And after that, we will call time, and the judges will engage with your comments, your perspectives, your arguments for 10 minutes. We will then call time, and then this august group of judges who are right behind our sort of representatives up front will engage. We want to hear your questions, we want to hear your comments, we want to hear your observations on what has been said. And that's going to go for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to start working towards the close. Right? Without any further ado, let us begin. Carbon markets represent a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya. And I invite Charles to begin as one of the proponents. Go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll keep this very short and simple because I'm all about time, and time is expensive. The climate is not waiting for anybody to correct itself. Whereas we all understand that Kenya is not really doing a lot of emissions. In fact, our emissions is 0.1% of the global emissions. Nevertheless, mistakes are made, and we all have to work together towards mitigating the same. So where are we? We are in a situation whereby much of the global north has done some bit of emission, unlike the global south. And we need to help each other realize a particular degree in terms of temperature reduction, 1.5 degrees. You might be wondering, why are we targeting this, for example? Think of this room, and think of Desmond opening, or rather lighting some Jiko with firewood because he likes going native, for example. Just bear with me. The only way, for example, we can make sure the room is well aerated is by opening the doors. Now think of it at the global level. The reason why the planet is getting hotter and hotter is because of what you call greenhouse gases, which are trapping heat in the atmosphere. And the only way in which you can reduce this increase in temperature is by doing one of three things. One is remove the greenhouse gases. Two, reduce the greenhouse gases. Or three, avoid the greenhouse gases. But all this is not without a cost. There's a cost implication, especially for us in the global south. So what we are proposing in the global south is very simple. We develop what we call carbon projects that are targeting these three initiatives: reducing, removing, or avoiding the emissions. And in return, we generate what you call the carbon offset, the carbon credits, which the global north comes and purchases. So as we can make sure, we can ensure the activity is sustainable. You're probably wondering, what exactly do I mean? Think at your home level. You must have heard, for example, of a Jiko called Coco or Jikokoa, for example. Previously, yourselves or your grandparents or your parents were using a cook stove running on purely, let's say, firewood. And there's a lot of emission. Data suggests that, for example, up to 4 million people die globally because of illnesses because of indoor air pollution. But think about it this way. Today, you put on, you switch on your Jiko using firewood, for example. And tomorrow, let's say you get a bioethanol Jiko like Coco, or let's say Jikokoa, for example. You will notice, by your own admission observation, the amount of indoor air pollution is decreasing. You're no longer choking, you're not coughing. Most of you do not like the smell of smoke within your clothing. Why? You know the reason why. And that's why Carbon Pro, for example, a cook stove project is looking at reducing the amount of emissions coming out during your cooking process. And if you really think about it, somebody is manufacturing these cook stoves, for example. If you look at the case of Cocoa Network, for example, the bioethanol Jiko, the one is blue in color, is running on sugarcane. Most of you know the case of sugarcane industry in the country. The farmers have been getting peanuts from the millers. But you have a carbon project developer who's assuring the sugarcane farmers, keep on producing sugarcane, and I'm giving a guarantee, I'm going to take your sugarcane because I need to make bioethanol fuel to ensure millions of Kenyans in Western Kenya and parts of Kenya are enjoying clean cooking. That is why I, as Charles Mwangaweru, Head of Carbon Policy Development at Vast Carbon, is supporting the motion that carbon markets are going to improve the livelihoods and the economy and the future of Kenya and the rest of the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
I represent a no to models that are not understood by the majority of Africans, especially land-based emission and biodiversity. The existing carbon market contracts must be redesigned to fit the African context. When it comes to voluntary carbon markets, please let us abandon the notion and the fallacy that this does not mean regulations. There's no unregulated trading in markets. Stock trading is regulated, commodity trading is regulated, real estate transactions are regulated, fertilizers, prescription drugs. The reason for regulation is to ensure that a fair market protects both buyers and sellers. These regulations for these trades in Kenya have local laws and locally developed. Without locally developed regulations, we cannot have a fair market in Kenya. Kenya's new finance bill is the starting point for locally regulated carbon markets. Trading desk needs to be established for different types of carbon credit transactions. Agricultural carbon credits are different from carbon credits for building emissions, transportation, cook stoves. All this needs to be sorted out. The critical element for transactions to work is the data. We need access to accredited buyers and pricing as Kenyans, as Africans. This information cannot be the exclusive domain of project developers. It must be shared by all to understand. I say again, carbon markets are contracts, and the carbon trading is a contract. A contract that is not understood cannot benefit anyone. And these contracts cannot be signed exclusively by large corporations, those with quote-unquote bankable assets. Regulations must be designed for the benefit of CSOs, micro SMEs, and community land right owners. This is 80% of the African population. It does not seem fair that we can arrange, if this does not seem fair, we can always arrange for the 1% to go and live in an informal settlement without access to their social networks, and we'll see how they're able to negotiate without those access. Autonomy means access to information. We need local mechanisms for contractual agreements. We need community land rights, which are not typical in international law, put into these contract mechanisms. Biodiversity credits under the Nagoya Protocol are intellectual indigenous property and need to be paid for. These safeguards will take time to develop, just like e-commerce took time to develop. We will not achieve this overnight. We have to also look at data privacy laws, especially on indigenous property and biopiracy issues. When we start looking at all these things, the division of a quality credit, where is the grievance mechanisms for communities and those who are not at this debate circle when there's a grievance on a faulty credit? Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you very much. So I think I want to start by saying that none of us is saying that the carbon markets don't have problems or issues. But the debate is centered around the discussion on balance. Do carbon markets provide greater opportunities than threats? Because if you think about the internet, there's child pornography, there's trading in illegal firearms over the internet, right? But at the same time, you have people being educated, you have transactions, you have businesses running on the internet. So the argument, at least, or the discussion, argument is a strong word, I understand. So the debate here is not, are carbon markets perfect, are carbon markets functioning? I think we all agree there are things that can be done. But on balance, are the opportunities outweighing the threats? So when I thought about this discussion, I thought, how about we just look back, right? Because carbon markets have been here for 20 years. The first carbon project, the first CDM project in Kenya was actually registered on 3rd September 2008. So I was just checking up these numbers on the UNFCCC website. This is 16 years ago. That was the first CDM, Clean Development Mechanism project in Kenya. So one way to also structure this debate is just to say, over the last 20 years, have the opportunities outweighed the threats? And I have a couple of points to present to you. So first, if you look at the energy sector, geothermal projects like Olkaria 2 Olkaria 3 were funded to a great extent by carbon finance. Right now, Kenya is number 6 in terms of installed geothermal capacity, more than Iceland, where in the 90s and in the 80s, Kenyans would send engineers to Iceland to study geothermal. But now Kenya generates more power from geothermal than Iceland. If you look at cooking, and my colleague mentioned a bit about cooking, you have companies like Cocoa Networks, you have companies like Burn that are distributing clean and improved solutions at scale, which is unprecedented in this market. I want to pose a question to all of us. There are 9.1 million households that use traditional forms of fuel in Kenya, 9.1 million. How are we going to transition the 9.1 million households without tapping into opportunities like the carbon market? We've been trying to do this for the last 40 years, and the progress has been very little because of the high upfront cost. And now there's clear demonstration from projects like Cocoa Networks that you can actually bypass this barrier through carbon projects. In terms of employment, Cocoa Networks employs more than 1,000 employees. Burn Manufacturing employs more than 1,000 employees. These are 2 carbon-funded companies. Just for scale, Safaricom employs 6,000 employees. In closing, I want to say, as we look to the future, think about the opportunity, because the estimated value of the carbon market is $600 million per year. That is more than the value of coffee exported from Kenya, which is about 341. The value of tea is 1.4 billion, which is just about 2 times the potential from carbon. So let's not miss out on this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Murefu.
Good afternoon. When you want to know that a system is broken, you look at the methodology. When you want to know that data can lie, you look at the methodology. When you want to look at an information and know whether it is presenting truth or lies, you interrogate the methodology. If you want to understand the streams of capital flow in a market, if you want to understand the stakeholders, if you want to map them and get to the end of your project, you look at the methodology. When we're looking at this particular topic, the most important question that we need to ask ourselves is, what's the model that is used? I will not discuss the model because I will use this part of the discussion in pitching my point. But in this intro, I want to say that sustainability uses this model. It looks at people, environment, and equity, and business, and balances them on a scale. And it says there's a marginal line that goes right at the center, which is called the marginal line of equity. Anyone who's playing outside these lines of equity cannot present a methodology that works. And I will be demonstrating that by saying that sustainability has moved over a long period of time, from 1948 to 2024, and it has undergone a lot of metamorphosis. But carbon markets is threatening this work and is clawing back on the benefits that were done. If you look at the Brundtland Commission in 1987, if you look at the Earth Summit in 1982, there were 3 pillars that were key. That one, there's a social pillar, there's an economic pillar, and lastly, there's a political pillar. That all this should always be balanced. But I will be proving to you this afternoon that indeed the carbon market is actually playing outside these rules and bullying sustainability and crumpling sustainability and wrapping sustainability in a pocket and throwing it away while over-glorifying a single market. Because there's nothing like carbon. There's only nature-based solutions that we can talk about. Thank you.
My name is Aaron Leopold. I'm the CEO of a small company that would not be able to exist without carbon credits. Our company is called Energrow, and we help make rural electrification financially viable for power companies. Today in Kenya, if you have power, it's because you are lucky enough to have been born somewhere near a power line. There are millions of people in Kenya that still do not have access to electricity, and there are billions of people across the continent that do not have access to electricity because electricity access is very, very expensive, and much of Africa is spread very, very far apart in communities that are not very economically attractive. This means that their schools have no power. This means their health clinics have no power. This means that their jobs have no power. This means that there's very little opportunity in those communities, and people leave, come to the cities where there's electricity and opportunity and access to markets, access to things like carbon markets and access to things like information about carbon markets. And my argument around carbon markets is that, while I agree with everything that we have said, is that by bringing an opportunity to bring capital, outside capital, wealthy capital, reliably paying capital into these rural communities is a way to bring opportunity and access to those rural communities that could never exist without carbon markets or something similar. We could have a different type of access to capital, but right now we have carbon. And why do we have carbon? Because there's also a global emergency. We've seen how the rains have changed. We've seen how the floods have gotten worse, how the droughts have gotten worse. We've seen how everything is becoming less and less predictable because there's a ticking clock. And right now, we have a very imperfect system, but we have a very imperfect problem as well. It's a problem that is very predictable in its unpredictability. We know that it's getting worse, but we don't know where it's getting worse and when it's getting worse and how it's getting worse, but it is getting worse. And so we have an imperfect system, we have a very limited amount of time, and we have billions of people that desperately need to understand how to adapt, how to become resilient to these threats, to these changes. Yet, if they don't have access to power, good education, good healthcare, good jobs, how can they ever adapt? That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron.
According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have to reduce fossil fuel production by 50% if we are to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius, or even have ambitions towards the 2 degrees. 2 years ago, according to the same, as of 2 years, investments in coal plants have increased by 250%, and investments of oil and gas have increased by 50%. So is corporate interested in cutting emissions at source, or interested in offsetting emissions to keep a good image? And isn't that greenwashing? In the reading pack, they said they flagged out the risk of community agency because communities only have access to 10% or less of the revenue. Where is the benefit sharing that we are talking about? What's the mechanism for the 60-40 that people were talking about? And after communities get 6 million, for example, as one panelist had pointed out, do they know what the middleman got? Or do they know what the owner of the credit got? Did they give the 6 million because they were just generous? I think not. When these questions are often raised, we are often told, well, we can have safeguards. But from experience, we have had flawed environmental and social impact assessments, for example, that are investor-driven. We have had instances where free prior informed consent is not done by communities. And from one of the panelists, you heard that corporates claim that the process of free prior informed consent is expensive. We have heard corporates say that through the framework of business and human rights, we can have grievance mechanisms. And my question is, as what I'm wondering, as Prof asked in the morning, is do we expect that the contributor to the problem is going to give the solutions to the problem? I think not, because they prefer profit over people. The other thing is the impact of this project on people's livelihoods and cultural significance. And one of the examples given was the situation of clean cooking. And, oh, I'm done? What comes to mind is, are we trading food sovereignty for carbon projects? Because Prof said that women had to cook other food aside from their indigenous foods that they are supposed to cook. So is it chakula bora ama bora chakula for carbon projects? Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. A round of applause for our debaters, who I think have been succinct and yet passionate about the issues that they're raising. We're going to give each of you a minute and a half to engage with the different arguments that were made from either side. And this time I'll start with the proponents who are against the motion. If there's any reaction or comment you want to make or engagement you want to have with the points that were raised by the folks that are proponents of this saying yes. And with each interaction, as you engage with any particular one of these individuals, they will then have a chance to engage back with any other person within the panel. And you're going to have a minute and a half each. Wanjira, once again, is our timekeeper. Thank you. Cecilia.
So I'll raise this as a question. I will yield the point that when it comes to industrial assets, energy, cook stoves, manufactured products, there is a tangible way of creating these carbon credits, and it works. Let us now go to what we're really trying to do, which is save the planet, right? Wajir, you can get carbon credits for growing pasture and grass, but you have to do additionality, and it's barren. And you have farmers there who are livestock, and just as they've finished growing all this nice grass, in come the warlords and graze on their property and disappear all the grass. Now, they've done all that work. Nobody paid them. They're trying to keep their livestock alive. Who pays? The other situation, you're in a beautiful green forest, beautiful views. And you're now being given 5 cents per seedling. Your children have to go to college. That tuition, we all know what that is, right? And you're told, for that 1 acre of land, I will give you 5 million on the spot. Forget the carbon credits. What choice are you going to make? That's it.
The other side would need to respond, unless you want all the questions to go at once. Okay.
Allow me to first respond to models as exposed by Desmond. So what's the model? And I can attach it to the issue of energy efficiency projects. Now, when you're looking at a good model whereby you're trying to make sure people, planet, and profits are in one, it's very simple. Think of a situation whereby you want to issue an improved cook stove to the community. However, some of these cook stoves tend to be very expensive from the manufacturing level. However, if you do your project design well, really, really well, and you target a good community whereby the baseline will give you good numbers. So, for example, you end up getting 3 to 4 credits per device. The way in which you model a project to make sure you remain sustainable as a company and also make sure the community is able to transition to clean cooking and also get something at the end of the day is by making sure you have a financial model that speaks to 2 things. One, when you get your carbon credits, you're able to do what? Reduce the capex, the cost of manufacturing, for example. Cocoa, Jikokoa, and so many other people have put in some of the anticipated carbon credits into reducing the cost of manufacturing because If you were to buy the cook stove at the manufacturing price, let alone retail price, it's not going to be affordable, therefore meaning clean cooking cannot be easily affordable. Now come to the case of electric cooking. Something we are doing as Vast Carbon with one of our clients is very simple. If you are trying to make sure that the people are adopting, let's say, an electric pressure cooker or an electric cook stove, for example, Kenyans have an issue of tokens. Electricity is very expensive. However, again, after subsidizing the cost of manufacturing, you can also reduce the OPEX by, for example, telling these clients, the end users, that for every so much you spend on electricity, part of the credit will be given back as token, power tokens, to ensure you're able to easily use these devices over and over again. Therefore, the company gets its profits, and you as the end user, you're able to get a share of the credits which you help generate. That's the model that the carbon market speaks about. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Desmond?
Charles, this is why we say that modeling in the perspective of business rather than putting environment into perspective is wrong. And I'll use the same example in clean cooking that you're raising. The cost of buying, let's say, some of the products in the clean cooking space today ranges from between 5,000 and it can go upwards, right? But if I buy charcoal, one bag of charcoal, which it depends in the area, it's less. I can use it first because culturally I know that this is the charcoal that I've been using. Two, I grow trees and I use this charcoal in my daily use. I can use the same trees for medicinal values. I can use the same trees for shade. There are many, many benefits that come from the trees. But here you want to replace my charcoal by giving me a product that takes away all these additional benefits that I have. From a cost and benefit analysis, that is upside and altogether wrong in terms of what I would go for in terms of the market, because the forces of the market says that demand and supply should be that I get value for what I should get, and you give me value for what I should get. Now let's go to the marginal willingness to pay. Remember, most Kenyans are earning below $1, and the inflation rates are going up, and right now we are still at 6.39, and this was the same from 2015, meaning that we are really in a bad shape, and we have taxes that are coming in and more, bills to pay. But then you give me a particular product that does not give me the value of money that I will have, then that will cause a different situation or externally for me as an individual. So when you talk about preferences, I think business people think that when you give me a cheaper product, the preference will be from the cost that you're giving me, but I am looking at the whole picture, which is the different benefits, which comes from the principles of sustainability.
Thank you, Desmond. Rafu?
I hope this doesn't generate into a discussion around cooking, but clearly we are going that direction. So I just want to clear out a couple of points because I think it's an important issue. So one, the cook stoves are not given. Nobody's giving out cook stoves. People buy them. So nobody is forcing anyone to transition from charcoal, firewood, to bioethanol or electric cooking. People buy these stoves, and they are flying off the shelf. The other thing about cooking is that the Ministry of Health estimates that 23,000 Kenyans die annually prematurely from using traditional forms of cooking. So to your point about cooking traditional fuels, 23,000 Kenyans die annually because of how they cook. That's 60 Kenyans every single day. When this conference started in the morning, 60 Kenyans have passed on because of cooking. And the opportunity is there from financing from carbon markets. Why shouldn't we take this up? Why should we resist this opportunity? And clearly the benefits are there. And to Cecilia's point, which actually we've not touched on, the examples given, and even when I came into this conference, I came a bit late, many of the examples given are on the extreme, right? the ones that didn't work out. But also you could accuse us of giving the examples on the extreme, that the ones that are working. But on balance, opportunities and threats, I think is very clear. Carbon markets should be embraced.
Thank you, Mrefu.
Can I ask my questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
One question.
I'm still not able to place the historical responsibility of emissions that are already in the atmosphere that we need to get back from this carbon discussion. And one of the things that was brought about is technology. And I am asking myself, is peatlands, wetlands, and tropical forests are responsible for sinking 70% of irreversible carbon? Isn't it more sustainable to invest in regenerating and conserving these ecosystems as opposed to gambling in technology, first of all, that we don't have balance in access and control of? Secondly, you've mentioned that carbon markets have been here for a long time. No one has mentioned how many times they have failed, but at least I can remember there's a time where the price went down to as low as $6 for one credit. So what happens in such a situation? Lastly is the thing, for a carbon project to make sense, it has to be on a massive scale, and you've heard about the intensity of the finances and the labor that needs to go in. And my rough mathematics, sincerely, the things that you mentioned here that you got sounds to me like peanuts and are not commensurate to the labor and the intensity that goes into that. Lastly, electricity is expensive, yes, despite us having, as said before, 92% renewable energy grid. Is it more sustainable to decentralize and democratize the national grid and ensure that we have community-led and community pool-funded grids, or wait for small companies to get $6 for carbon credit to buy us solar panels?
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah. I think, Cecilia, you graciously conceded that for infrastructure and whatnot, that carbon credits can make sense. I think we will all concede also that on questions of land use, this is where everything is still messed up, right? This is where things are happening that shouldn't happen, and also where the most work is needed. What I would paint then, because I have to on this side, is the optimistic view that there are massive opportunities for pastoralists, for ecosystems, for biodiversity, also to benefit when the work that is put in, that these people, that these animals, that these processes undertake, that there's value that can be created when it is recognized. Just like decades ago when household labor was not recognized as having a value. Now we recognize it, all of us, as having a value. Therefore, we see more women in the workforce. We see more parents taking time to parent together rather than one parent doing all the parenting. And I think this is where we need to move towards. And it's easy to talk about cooking because there's a little SIM card inside all of these things that do all the work for us in terms of counting. And that's not fair for all of the land use issues and all of the other complicated projects. And I think, I am very much for carbon markets, but I'm not for one-sided or unfair carbon markets, which I think we can concede is what we have now. There's the easy projects and there's the hard projects. Well, the hard projects are the ones that have the most vulnerable communities, that have the most challenging, but potentially most rewarding outcomes for marginalized groups as well. And I do think that there's an argument for fast-tracking some things, slow-tracking others, but in order to make sure that those slow ones have enough money, we need to find some kind of equitable balancing of the financing as well. And I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Hard-hitting questions, polite, agreements and disagreements. I'm going to invite our judges to enter into this conversation. I'm going to have them ask, if you could split yourselves up and have 2 judges speak to the proponents with any questions, comments, observations, and 2 judges speak to the opponents with any questions, comments, observations for a grand total of 2 minutes, so they can have 2 minutes to respond. And then we're going to open this up to the floor to hear from you, your thoughts, your engagement, your observations. You've already been making some non-verbal communications with your applause. Yes, I think the judges have asked for discretion to behave as judges do. So go ahead.
Thank you all so much for this really riveting and engaging debate. I think this is more and more of the kind of conversation structured in this way that we need to be having. And it was quite interesting that the for side was focused on more the benefits of technological solutions and eventually conceded that it's the nature-based space where things get difficult. And the against side was focused naturally on the spaces of nature-based solutions, the challenges around community land rights, land tenure, the contracting, the caveats, short-term versus long-term incentives, even down to insurance of what happens in the future, even down to the very economic model that governs the way that the world works. And conceded technology is one thing, but these difficult spaces, this is where the debate needs to really go. And so that was actually quite interesting to me. So the question that I have, I'll just ask both my questions. My father always taught me, it's important that when you are debating, not just to be against something, but to be for something as well. So I'd like to ask each side, for the against side, if not through carbon financing, what are the mechanisms that we are proposing for genuinely unlocking billions to trillions of dollars for the restoration work, for the ecosystem preservation work that we're talking about? That's my question to you all. And likewise, on the for side, as you heard, many real difficult challenges in order to get carbon markets right. They don't have to be perfect, but they have to work for people. What are the non-negotiables that you would ensure are embedded into what is going to happen tomorrow on Wednesday to ensure that carbon markets work for the nature-based side? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I have to say, at the beginning, I reflected on the question, and so you had a difficult task of answering a political question, because it was a question of, you know, is it greater of a threat or greater of an opportunity? And it's always an answer of it depends. And you argued on both sides. And I want to especially commend the team against, because I had never imagined someone would really argue against the way you did. Congratulations, you did very well. Now, beyond some of the things about the realities on the ground based on experience in Kenya and based on case studies or projects here, I would imagine, or I would sum up this around 2 standpoints, 2 philosophical standpoints. There is the doing of a thing, there is the being of a thing. And the being nature of a thing is just what it is. The philosophy that guides its existence, the philosophies that structures the way it perceives the reality. And the doing is what it does. And I think the argument for was very much about carbon market can do this. Carbon market can give additional income to farmers. It can provide electricity for people without assets. But this, against team, they were questioning the very philosophy behind it and the notion that can a bad thing produce a good outcome, or a bad philosophy. And that is the question that I want both of you to reflect on. What is it about the philosophy, the framing of carbon market that makes it hard in terms of its reality on the ground? Now, and for you guys, for the Team 4, would you still stand on the notion that even if it is badly conceptualized, it can still produce a good thing on the ground? Even the judges. Thank you. So Funsho and Rebecca took my questions. So not to belabor, I think, the comments that have been made, and perhaps this is to both teams. One of the prevailing notions you hear when you talk about solutions that are environmentally friendly, green solutions, is always the question around green premium. What you have to pay in addition to what the market is able to afford, and the alternative is usually something that is obviously less than desirable. Do carbon markets help in addressing that, or is there another mechanism for us to enable? Because the reality is, what is the incentive? And maybe let me address this to Irene. What is the incentive for the polluters to transition without the compelling sort of economic basis if there's a premium to be paid, and that premium obviously making them less competitive or making the economies less competitive in a way that we're talking about political decisions here. So these are decision makers who want to remain in office, and so what is the incentive for them to make a decision that will ultimately result in them losing power?
Well, they took all my questions. All right, so I think my thoughts and comments are not necessarily directed at either side, but to both of you. And like Rebecca said, and I think it was really incredible to listen to these, to your arguments and your positions. And one of the things, a couple of the things that I would really be interested in hearing from both sides is an engagement around some of these, specifically the definition of sustainable development. I don't think we really got into that. Because when we think about the potential that we've talked about with carbon markets, even during the discussion today, we did hear examples of, and certainly from community representatives, of the ability to make real changes at the local level. But in my understanding of that, they were relatively small changes, right? Relatively piecemeal. And when I think about sustainable development, I think about making the kind of significant change that actually changes the opportunities, like we're talking about, not just of that immediate family, but we're talking about generations. We're talking about building wealth as opposed to providing income. What is the potential for the carbon credit market to do that? I don't think I heard, certainly from the foresight, presenting that, because I think that is key for us. When we talk about economic development in Kenya, that's what it's about, right? It's about getting us past that $1, less than $1 a day, to really changing the prospects for our citizens for generations to come. And are our carbon markets set to do that? Both from, I'm going to ignore that one, for families today, but then also for the future, right? And I think it's also really important, because this question was raised earlier, as part of that issue, the equity question, and I think Irene mentioned it, really important, I think, to engage on that topic, right? Because you want to make sure that the possibility for really transferring of wealth and building of wealth comes with these projects. Then the other thing, and I wanted to say, was talking about the political economy in Kenya as we know it. I think we started to talk about a little bit of the regulations, but we didn't really engage on that. And yet it was brought up earlier today. What does it mean when we were told, excellent, we might get excellent regulations on paper, we've got great laws, but what does it mean for us today with the kind of systems and structures we have? Are the benefits that we expect to see with carbon markets really possible? And if they are, how do you address them? Corruption was raised today, illiteracy, all these differences. And I think if we don't address that, then we're still talking pie in the sky. And I think really important for both sides to talk about what does that mean. And I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, judges, for largely complying with what you are asked to do. I'll invite the debaters to respond. I will ask the debaters to respond to the specific questions they were asked, both for and against. And where a question was not raised specifically to you and you want to take an extra stab for brownie points, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes each. Thanks.
Hey, the questions that were addressed to me are a mouthful. But if corporate really cared about sustainability, the incentive would be, the climate crisis is a threat to people. If species go extinct, there's no profit. But they don't think in that way. Since they think about like profit right now, one of the incentives has been the energy question. So corporates doing energy audits, and the Kenya Climate Innovation Center did a report that showed that corporates that did their energy audits showed that the ones who transitioned their energy infrastructure to renewable energy or to not relying so much on the national grid were able to reduce their cost by, I think, 40 to 60%. So those are some of the incentives that corporate can look at. What's the alternative? I think, well, I don't buy into this carbon market thing, but because it's here, I think it should be an additional to what we are talking about in climate finance. And we must not lose focus on the question of reforming the global financial architecture so that we are able to get our compensation, we are able to get reparations and repatriation, and we are able to, I would say, eradicate debt, but people think that's too radical, reconstruct debt, you know, those questions. We must not lose focus on that. And also looking internally, what in fashionable terms people call illicit financial flows. I just call them loot and plunder, because the money we lose is almost equivalent to the money that we need for adaptation and mitigation. So how do we ensure that we don't lose up money and direct it to climate? And the other thing is, when we are doing our planning domestically as countries, how much money from our domestic budgets actually goes to climate action, and does it do the work that it's supposed to do? If the FDB gives us money for climate action, how do we ensure social accountability to ensure that that money actually does climate action and not anything other than climate action? And the other thing to think about—
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
There's a time limit. Thank you, Irene.
Myself, I want to say that the problem that we have with carbon markets is just transitions. It's not the market itself, but the transitions. What we are asking, and the reason why we are saying that it's a threat, that if the transition is not guided within certain principles, especially the principles of sustainability, then we are going to be in a far much dangerous place than we were before. And I opened this and I didn't get a chance to expound on this, so I'll expound on this as a response to the questions. Sustainability says that, or the principles of sustainability says that you're not just looking at the present generation. You're looking at the present generation and also the future generation, intra and intergenerational equity. And so when you are looking at the carbon market, your products should be looking at the time horizons so that they're not short-sighted. They should be there to serve not just us, but the future generations. The second part is that the scale. If we know that the discounting principle tells us that we are going to deplete some of the resources, that we're not going to get them back, then we should not get into those particular decarbonization pathways. Rather, we should look for better technology that will ensure that the scaling is towards what is sustainable. Because if you scale a problem, then you're going to deal with the problem for a long time. The other aspect is the product efficiency. When we are interrogating cooking stoves, or when we are interrogating clean cooking, what we are saying is that don't just give us products. Give us products that are tested that can actually have the additional benefits over and beyond the profitability. Because if you brandish the profitability, all the other benefits that we have or we get from other cooking options will outweigh the choices in terms of which product we are picking. And the other aspect is stakeholder engagement and mapping. Thank you. The Paris Agreement, Article 6 of Paris Agreement, and the Kigali Amendment to Paris Agreement in 2017 after 2015 were very salient developments. And the reason why those key amendments came in place was because there were some issues that were left off the voluntary carbon market arguments, and now was leading voluntary carbon markets towards a compulsory and compliance-based perspective. And if you look at the trends in the world, EU and other jurisdictions, most countries are moving towards compliance, saying, if you're going to get to the carbon markets, do it well, ensure it has the credibility, and ensure that it has the trust that it comes with. And that is the argument.
So I think we have like 4 more debates here. Answering the questions one by one. What if not carbon markets? I just think they can't be a standalone. You know, very few people live only on stocks. Micro bonds, social bonds, and Kenya's been blessed to be one of the participants in universal basic income, and that has been very powerful. What is wrong with the framework? The value of labor, it's the problem that we have all over. So when you're talking about these carpet consultants, business, isn't the farmer an expert at healing the earth? So why is it that the consultant gets 50,000 per hour and the farmer gets 2 cents? When it comes to green incentives, what I'm liking about this carbon market is it's showing us the price of greed. And what it's telling me is, as everybody is rushing to the table, even people who don't know what they're doing, they're just putting money into it, they can be bought. Can we buy them to do the right thing? The last part in terms of sustainable development, building wealth, marginal savings rate. Why don't we have nature banks? Kenya is one of the few countries, or if the only country in the world, that has what's called a development REIT, which is you can assemble a REIT just for development purposes. I tried, crazy idea, to get people together on a wetland banking model using a development REIT, and everybody thought I was like landing from the moon on Mars. So, but why can't it be done? Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. I hand it over to our proponents.
Good sir. Okay.
Aaron, you have the privilege of going first. Go.
Okay. All right. So, Rebecca, you had a really fascinating question. I want to make sure that we specifically answer that, which was, what are the non-negotiable ways to improve this? I think the answer is one word. It's education. Education, education, education. People do not know what carbon markets are. They are confusing even to the people that do know what they are. The barriers to entry are enormous. These projects, when they are so big, there's only a handful of people that understand them, right? That's unacceptable. That has to change. That's a non-negotiable, right? And, can a good thing really come from a bad thing? Which was a fascinating question as well. I think we all have to learn from our mistakes. And I think that's what carbon markets are trying to do, but they're doing it imperfectly. As Desmond had said, it's the transition that's painful, right? It's like tearing off the Band-Aid very, very slowly, right? No fun, right? We need to transition in a way that makes sense, and that needs the education and informed consent, etc. I think that, wealth versus income, this question was really fascinating, and I wanted to just highlight one example, a Kenyan carbon project that is beautiful and horrible at the same time, which is that of the case of the Mount Kasigao Conservation Area. It's a place that I have been lucky enough to visit twice. Mount Kasigao is one of the most beautiful, most special places in Kenya. It's in the middle of Tsavo. It's super, super dry at the bottom, and there's a rainforest at the top. And this rainforest at the top keeps the water in the communities flowing 365 days a year, and without this rainforest at the top, the communities would die. But that forest had been chopped because people needed the firewood. And part of the beauty of carbon credits is that initially paid people to reforest and to protect. Now it's paying to protect that forest. It was actually reforested a long time ago. Now it's being paid to just being maintained. But there are bad actors within this beautiful story. And someone within the project in Kasigao was sexually abusing workers in the project, right? And so I'm not using this example as like something, bad there, but there are always bad actors everywhere. The internet example that Mrefu gave was a perfect example. Also, we're in Kenya. We already had the corruption question, right? We're gonna, this property not for sale on like every garage in the city, right? That's gonna happen with our land. So we have to make sure that people are educated, and then we can really build that wealth. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
Good. So, Olufunso, you asked a very good question, and I was really tempted to start answering it, but I have 2 minutes. So I'm going to answer Nyagothia's question first on wealth, and if I have some time, I'll try and touch on what you asked. So just about 5 years ago, we didn't have Hass avocados in Kenya, or at least not at scale. And someone identified Hass as a commodity that people want to buy, and built systems, built markets, built processes around Hass avocado. Today, or last year, because I was looking at the numbers before I came, we're exporting $1.1 billion worth of avocado. It's now number 3 or 4 in terms of foreign exchange earner. Carbon is a commodity. But your second question, is it transparent? Are there questions with inclusiveness? Are there questions with equity? The answer is no. And the No team have articulated the problems quite well, from what Desmond was saying, what Cecilia was saying. So there's the potential, but there are challenges. And I want to end by saying in 2005, we were part of this kind of conversations because those are the early days of the clean development mechanism. And we talked about the problem so much that we ended up forming a Kenya climate change working group. Because we were saying, should we engage with the carbon market? Should we not engage with the carbon market? And the train left. The assets were going to, the capital was flowing to China, to India, to Brazil. Let's not make the same mistake this time round. There's potential for wealth creation. $600 million is a lot of money, and very many people can benefit from that. People talk about growing this economy to 300 billion GDP. 600 million, if you think about it, because tea is like 1% of GDP. This is like 0.5% of GDP. So how can we not ask ourselves, how do we better engage with this market? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrefu. Charles, you have the last word.
Thanks. I'll try and answer 2 questions if there's enough time. Let me start political economy. You were asking things to do with the regulations, what will work, what won't work, how is the future looking at with the good regulations. In our NDC, Kenya said that we'll require $62 billion to implement the NDCs, and of course, graciously, the government said we can only afford 13%, and the rest must be conditional, in the sense that for us to do the NDC targets, to meet our targets, there must be external financing. Now, interestingly, now we have got Article 6, specifically Article 6.2, the ITMO framework, whereby a country like Ghana decided to say that we are only going to meet our NDC targets if somebody comes and finances us through Article 6. ITMO, we develop projects for you in terms of we meet our NDC targets if and only if we're able to get a country to off-take them, international and flood mitigation outcomes. It's now working for Ghana, whereby we have got hundreds of thousands of rice cultivating farmers who are part of that program. Clean cooking energy projects are also part of that program. Because Ghana decided to engage the international community, such as the UNDP, to ask them what really will work best in terms of legislation. Give us your best practice. We come back to Accra, and we internalize and see what really will be suitable for the people of Ghana. Right now, there are various players, including ACME, AC4All, GIAB, Vast Carbon, and so many other people who are trying to work with different countries, different entities in doing what we call the carbon market activation plan. Simply asking countries, what do you have, how are you? We're doing a proper diagnostics, and then we're saying, should you possibly have these regulations, you are going to be able to finance and grow the carbon market in a sustainable way. So by the time now let's say you're asking for investors to come in and bring in their capital to invest, then they're assured there'll be some form of return on investment. I mean, no investor can just put in their money. There has to be that security, and that's through this kind of a good political economy. Most importantly is the kind of projects you are looking at. And interestingly, Vera Gold Standard, Article 6.2 are very keen on making sure that any carbon offset project must have a clear sustainable development plan. That is the SDGs. The gold standard will never accept your project if you cannot clearly demonstrate 3 key SDG goals. That to me is whereby the market has learned from its mistakes and it's improving day by day. And I'm very certain, because I'm in this industry, it's my career, yes, we are going to get somewhere whereby everything is going to be working for everybody. The people, planet, and community, everybody is going to be benefited. But we have to go it gradually. We learn a mistake, we adjust, we progress, bit by bit. That's the only way it works. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. Learn, adjust, progress. We are getting to the tail end of this debate. I will invite the proponents and the opponents to consider who is going to give your summation. Have you appointed a candidate for your summation? I'll encourage you to talk amongst yourselves, and as you do, I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm looking for questions. So put your hands up. I see one hand at the back. And please keep your questions brief. I reserve the right to interrupt you.
So my name is Dr. Ngeno. I'm an architect, and I'm a lecturer at JQuad. My question is going to be very brief and a bit simplistic in nature. So yes, we agree, for example, that these projects are working in terms of reducing carbons and all, but I would like to find out, so for example, the GECOs, the amount of carbon they are reducing from the atmosphere. Does anyone look at the tail end? That person who has bought those carbons, what is their effect on the atmosphere compared to the effect? Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is not really give some financial incentives to small players or the global south. The idea is to reduce the carbon emissions overall and to help the environment. So what is the difference? Whatever this GECO is doing to the environment vis-a-vis this person who has bought these carbons, what they are doing to the environment, is it commensurate? Because I feel that's where, for me, this debate about carbon markets. And I then dare argue that carbon markets is not only a threat to Kenya, but it's a threat to the globe. Thank you.
Accounting. Thank God I'm a lawyer and I don't have to think about the math. I see another hand here.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric Musau. For me, it's really a comment. There was a comment there about what funded geothermal power, and I think, in Kenya we had a rights issue by KenGen. We had the first infrastructure bond. Obviously, these investments were not done necessarily out of carbon credits incentive, but you can actually see as a country, we were actually already geared. We are quite focused on having the right environment. And I think as a country, we need to have taxes as a key driver, as well as regulations, because that's the only way we are going to drive efficient behavior. If you want people to adopt electric vehicles, we need to have higher taxes on fuel and lower taxes on electric vehicles in order to drive that element. And of course, from an element of regulations, I think now there's regulation around carbon markets. The Climate Change Amendment Act 2023 now has more regulations. When you think about the carbon registry, as well as anyone involved in carbon trading, as well as benefits that would accrue to communities where these carbon markets are located. So at the end of the day, I think we are making the right progress. By the end of the day, carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, are really just an additional tool of there are many things that we will keep doing. Thank you.
Here?
My name is Dorothy, and mine is a comment. Actually, both parties have brought a very interesting debate, and it has balanced to me. But my comment is, as I was listening, they have based their debate on only renewable energy. When we talk about carbon credit, we have valuation of those activities. There are some people doing renewable energy. There are some people doing carbon energy, soil carbon. There are some people doing forestry. So it is really based on the renewable energy side. And from listening to that, it has really brought up what is happening, because most of the people or the population of the people doesn't understand, and very few of them have understood. So both of the debate is balancing so that we can have information given to everybody to understand and to know. But to support the motion is, we have heard Wakili saying it has not come out very clearly on the benefit for the community. In my community or in Kenya, the program I'm working with is supporting over 1,000 people. When I joined the program, I didn't have a land. But when I just took a step, I didn't have a land to plant a tree so that a tree can be counted, I get the money. But I took a step of developing a tree nursery where the person who has land could come and buy and plant, because they have a land, but I don't have. So by taking that step of establishing a nursery, I want to invite you to my farm. I have three land.
Wow.
Recently, I have bought one land through the seedlings. It's just the other. Last year is when I gotten my first payment for carbon credit from the trees, but I've been getting a lot of money from nursery because there are somebody. So it is something compensating another activity. Is a cycle of benefit targeted by credit, but other things. Look at the water, sanitation, we have soil doing smart agriculture. All those combination of activities brings it out and support even the local people. That is what I could comment.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And from an intergenerational perspective, I think the call has also been made. Was there one more question, or we were done? I think, there we go. Go ahead.
So, to be fair to this, actually, I've sort of tried to interact with the regulation as proposed, and of course the Amendment Act. And from where I sit, I'm from two hearts. For myself, then for my grandmother, that I'm going to explain. For the carbon market regulation, I think for public and community projects, the level of protection can clearly be seen. But then I'm going to give an example of what drives our market, which is cost. An average person is going to be driven by a cost. Let's say, and I'm going to give an example of the solar lanterns that are being, that I gave my grandmother. It was very cheap. I would pay around 50 bob daily for around 1 year. But then, of course, I've also had the argument around the clean stoves. And then, of course, if you go to the pricing, you'd find that these things go for premier prices. We'll all agree. But then again, if you listen to the business owners, you realize that they leverage on these credits, which also drives what becomes the cost. So a private person in me, or for my grandmother with whom I got this solar, driven by cost, she didn't know that at some point her participation contributed greatly to reduction of emission. That is not coming out clearly, and I'm hoping that even as we talk about protecting community lands, the end user getting a Jiko or whatever stove must really, in defining consent, he or she should be told clearly that by using our Jiko, you've saved this level of emission, and that's why we are selling you at this price. Not to use whatever impact you've made by selling your Jiko and give credits, which I know in fullness of time, and I've had somebody from Sustainable Finance, they will use this credit to get collateral for financing tools, and it's already happening. I've seen it happen in a bank in Zambia, giving loans on credit. So the aspect of education must really be for the end user to clearly understand. And that is when that free and informed consent would really make sense.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. Have the people who will have the final word been identified for each team? Great. Murefu looks long-suffering. I think, are you the one who's been identified for the proponents?
Yes.
Okay. So there was one question that came through quite clearly, which was the question on accounting and whether or not carbon markets represent not just a threat to Kenya, but really to the world, with regard to the whole idea of whether what is being claimed is actually commensurate to what is happening. I would invite Murefu, as you make your conclusion, perhaps to address that question. And last but not least, after these points are made, we are going to take, I think, the last word from the judges, reflecting on what they have seen, what they have heard. Funso has very kindly agreed to do that. And then you're going to have the final word. We're going to take another poll and find out where you land on this question, whether anything has shifted for you in the course of this conversation. And then I'll hand it back to Wanjira to wrap up.
Let me go here. Since I'm wrapping up, let me stand behind this. So let me start by thanking the organizers of this event, WRI, Aspen, NCN, and everybody else who's brought us together. I think this conversation is needed. There needs to be more of this conversation. We need to focus it, at least in my view, on how can we make these markets better. And in conclusion, I want to say that, before I conclude though, you'd asked me to address the question on accounting. So the whole premise, as you rightly put it, of the carbon markets is that a ton of carbon emitted from Mombasa has the same effect on the atmosphere as a ton of carbon emitted in Mexico, in Monaco, and any other city starting with M that you can think about, right? So that's the whole basis, right? But the reality is to reduce a ton of carbon, say from emissions from the airline sector, is significantly more expensive than, say, reducing emissions from cooking. And that's why then you create a market where those, wherever they are, who are interested in reducing their emissions, they can invest in projects that reduce tons of CO2, because it doesn't matter whether, not that it doesn't matter, I have to be careful here. It matters, but the effect is the same, right? The effect on the atmosphere is the same. So if you have, if you can spend $20 to reduce a ton of CO2 through a cooking project, and you have the option of spending $1,000 to reduce a ton from the airline sector, the logic is then you should go with the cooking first. That's the logic. Of course, we can disagree on philosophical issues. But how is it measured? So the first step is you have to do a project design document. You have to pick a methodology. So you cannot, like I had someone say, you cannot change your methodology halfway. You have to determine your methodology. You have to say how many tons of CO2 you're reducing, and then that is traded with the person who's buying. The philosophical questions, that's why we are debating, and we'll keep debating because it's healthy. In conclusion, I just want to say that it's a learning process, even for Like Aaron has been in this sector for many years, but it's still a learning process. There are still sentiments that we need to be careful about. But to Funsho's question, because now at least I have a chance to address it, I think we have to be careful with wrestling with the idea versus the execution, just the way you framed it. In my view, the idea has been framed well, because the climate question is a global problem that requires local action, but local action alone cannot address a global problem. So in other words, if, say, we woke up tomorrow and Africa could switch off its emissions to zero, but the rest of the world is not reducing their emissions, we're messed up. So Africa cannot do it alone, Europe cannot do it alone, America cannot do it alone. So carbon markets creates this opportunity in an imperfect world where there's collaboration between the North and the South. And even sometimes between the South and the South, because you can be buying credits from, buyers can be from Asia. So again, I would conclude by saying, as we think about carbon markets, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's learn from the first dispensation, which is from 2005 to the Paris. What did we get wrong? Because carbon markets are here, we don't know about the future, but at least we can prepare ourselves to better engage, to learn, to work on better methodologies, transparency, ensuring communities get what they need to do. And that's my parting shot. Thank you very much.
I want to echo the gratitude for this forum and for all of you for staying here this late. When we were asked, I didn't know on the scientific side, when we were invited to debates, I was a little scared it would be like the GMO debate where we get shot. So this has been very polite. What is clear is what either side that you're on, the markets are here. The markets are here to stay, they're active. So it's not about can we stop them, it's how do we improve. And on that side, those who know me on the science side, we keep on talking about carbon. The reality is it's all greenhouse gas emissions. Methane, we know it accumulates in, so with the accounting, what are we counting? If you can Google California methane trees, you'll see that we found out that the wildfires were spreading because trees absorb methane as much as they do carbon dioxide, and so they just burst into flames. Sulfur hexafluoride, which is the insulation gas used in your transformers, and every transformer lasts 40 years. So anybody buying a sulfur hexafluoride transformer unit, you're not going to meet the NDCs, and that is not on the World Bank checklist right now. Don't buy this. And it's worse than carbon dioxide. So we need to get those accounting measures right, number one. Looking at ecosystem enablement, yes, new money flows, this is what everybody has been dreaming of, and that's what carbon markets offer. But there's a difference between money flow and wealth flow. And what we're saying is the money is flowing, it is going, but the wealth is not flowing. It's not flowing to the right places. Looking at effects versus impacts, we still haven't gotten a clear definition of what are benefits, environmental, social. All the economic benefits seem to be talked about at the corporate level. We need to get those economic benefits at the individual level. And in terms of looking at what is the compliance and what doesn't, we have a market. The market is designed not to make us money, but to make us finance what we wouldn't otherwise do, which is called that transition. We need to get that methodology right by sector. If it's easy for energy, it might be easier for blue carbon, fine. But then what happens for agroforestry? What happens for wildlife and biodiversity? Because that's the other one coming down the pipe with the TNFD, right? We need to get these sector-specific methodologies defined. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're inviting one of our judges to have the last word, and then we will invite you to have the ultimate
last word.
Thank you. Please put your hands together for them. In the interest of time, and thank you, judges, for the work that you're doing, 3 points. Number one, I want us to remind ourselves that we're in the second wave of the global carbon economy. There was the first wave in the Kyoto era. Unfortunately, Africa, we missed out. 80% of over 12,000 projects in the pipeline and in the portfolio, worth about $500 billion, went to 4 countries: Brazil, India, Mexico, and China. And we are now in the second wave. We cannot afford to miss out. And it's very important that we know the market is here, but we have to be part of it. Secondly, it's also important to appreciate the fact that a market is as good as the principles and the structures that uphold the values behind it. A market is not just an economic system. A market reflects also the values of the players. But while we see it as a game, it's also important to understand that there are rules of the game. And we have to be part of those who design the rules of the game. So the rules of safeguards, the rules of benefit sharing, all of it, the things that form the pillars and the values, we must be part of those who design it. And there's also a question, and the last point is, as we embrace this divide between what is possible and what is the reality, we must also learn that there's room for us to build the plane as we're flying it. It will never be perfect, but as we take off, we can learn. And the key word is learning. Let's learn from the past. Let's learn from the present, but let's get things better. And I think this is the beginning of a long conversation. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Build the plane while flying. That is both exhilarating and terrifying. I hear people who say that they're not boarding. So let me remind you of our motion as we then take our final poll. Carbon markets represent a greater opportunity than threat for sustainable development in Kenya. How many of you are now for this motion? Wow, okay. Okay, how many of you are against? And how many of you came not knowing but have now picked a side? Wow. I invite you to give a huge hand to our debaters. Thank you all so much. You have entertained, informed, challenged, and inspired us, and we are grateful. As we conclude, I'd just like to hand back to Wanjira and to say, ultimately, I think we need to give our audience a big hand because they stayed with us the whole time. And they sort of made possible what we had dreamed, since there's a real risk that this was going to be an empty auditorium, or an auditorium of people on their phones, or a gathering of people outside discussing as they waited for their friends to end this so they could go. So thank you all so, so much for your time.
And ladies and gentlemen, Wangui, Kanyaru, thank you very much. A whole day of riveting engagement. Thank you, Wangui. And I couldn't agree more. The truth of the matter is you cannot improve on perfection. I will not say one more word about what we have heard. We will marinate on that. And what I can assure you is on behalf of our partners, SDSN Kenya, the Nairobi Climate Network, the Aspen Institute, CAPE, and WRI, we will do this again and again. This has been absolutely inspiring. And we take away so much. I have to say, I'm one of those who came out much better for this, so thank you all very much.